Public Health England posted an update recently on gov.uk saying that as of March 19, 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease, or HCID, in the UK. Which begs the question, if this is true, why do we all need to self-quarantine and shut down the entire economy instead of simply quarantining at-risk individuals? I happened to catch an interview on CNBC recently where the interviewee called this a government-mandated recession, and I thought it was a pretty unique insight and a lot better than you typically get from mainstream television. But the more I thought about it, the more validity I saw in the claim, in the sense that this aggressive, fear-inducing response by the federal government and the mainstream media is essentially the basis that will cause a recession, not the spread of the virus or the outbreak itself. I think a good way to analyze this phenomenon is to look at it from a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, specifically using the ABC technique of irrational beliefs developed by Albert Ellis. His technique uses a three-step approach to analyzing irrational beliefs, their consequences, and the events that led to those beliefs. In the ABC approach, A is for activating event, B stands for beliefs that were created as a result of this event, and C is for consequences, or negative feelings and behaviors that occurred as a result of the belief. Contrary to popular opinion, which assumes the three occur linearly, Ellis believed that it was not A, the activating event, that caused the negative beliefs and consequences, but rather how the patient interprets or misinterprets the meaning of the event that helps cause the consequences. In the context of coronavirus, A, or the activating event, is the outbreak itself. B is the response or belief that shutting down society, closing businesses, and forcing people to stay at home is superior to only quarantining at-risk individuals. And C, or the consequences, is the actual recession, martial law, and loss of privacy and individual freedom resulting from a society in lockdown. In Ellis's view, the belief, or in other words, the government's interpretation of the meaning of and reaction to the outbreak, is the factor that will trigger recession, not the outbreak itself. Put another way, a record 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment, not because of coronavirus, but because of the government's beliefs and response to the threat.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
While the spread of the virus is likely to peak in the coming months, the negative beliefs and as a byproduct, the consequences, are likely to be much longer lasting. As evidence to back up my belief, I want to look at a report that was published in, I believe it was 2012, by the Rockefeller Foundation in conjunction with the Global Business Network, entitled Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And in the report, they conducted a specific exercise that was called Lockstep, which envisioned a theoretical global pandemic that has an uncanny resemblance to how the coronavirus outbreak is playing out. I think it's definitely worthwhile to check out for yourself. It could provide you some really good insights into what the future may hold. And you can find the report online. Just search Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development and the Rockefeller Foundation, and it should pop up. But for now, I just wanted to briefly quote a passage that appears towards the end of the write-up that talks about the aftermath of the outbreak. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasing global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. Keeping in mind that it was a fictional exercise, what we're seeing currently play out almost to a T mirrors what they outlined in this publication. Fear-mongering and guilt-tripping on the part of the state and the media have already created an economic downturn. As more citizens panic, selfishly hoard food and supplies, and crave security in the face of uncertainty, there's the potential for even more negative outcomes, some of which we're already seeing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the most likely possible scenarios and explain their implication for the individual. I think probably the most likely or apparent is a permanent authoritarian welfare state, including global subsidized healthcare for everyone and forced vaccines. I also think it's likely we see increased travel restrictions even after they lift the travel ban, especially for unvaccinated individuals. A crackdown on the internet and physical real-world communities is also a very likely possibility. You can already see this manifesting in things like the proposal of the Earn It bill outlawing online encryption and the prohibiting of gatherings of more than 2 people in Germany and other countries. We've already seen quantitative easing in the form of pumping $2 trillion into the money supply, and hyperinflation is a likely outcome. To make financial matters worse, the attempted phasing out of cash or the inability to use or access your bank account will send consumers into a frenzy. I saw a video recently put out by the FDIC pleading with customers to not withdraw their money and store it at home in places like underneath their mattress. Another possibility for the future, and something many of us may have already experienced firsthand, but might be a more long-term reality than we realize, is food rationing, in which retailers and supermarkets limit the amount of items a person can buy in order to keep up with increased demand. Implanting individuals with biometric chips under the guise of preventing the spread of infectious disease is also likely somewhere down the road. This scenario becomes even more realistic when taking into account that Bill Gates called for a national tracking system as part of disease testing efforts. The potential future scenario that I'm personally most worried about is elevated electromagnetic radiation and poisoning after the rollout of 5G infrastructure. An article published by Scientific American in October 2019 claimed that after conducting more than 500 studies, it had found harmful biologic or health effects from exposure to RFR, or radio frequency radiation, at intensities too low to cause significant heating. Some of these effects include increased cancer risk, an increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damages, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans. The article also goes on to say that damage goes well beyond the human race, as there is growing evidence of harmful effects to both plant and animal life. While on the surface, it might not seem like this is related to an outbreak of an infectious disease, something is suspicious about the fact that President Trump found time amid all the madness to sign 2 bills relating to 5G into law. The first, the 5G Act, requires consulting with the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security on the rollout of 5G, and submitting a proposal to Congress within 180 days. The second was the Broadband Data Act, which seeks to ensure that even the most rural Americans are connected to 5G. There's also multiple videos surfacing on YouTube that captured workers installing 5G infrastructure in schools while the students and teachers are home on lockdown. The question then becomes, how do we thrive in this type of post-apocalyptic dystopian future? From where I'm standing, the best way to be prosperous in this type of environment is to adopt an analog lifestyle in a digital world. And what I mean by that is embracing tangible, physical assets, relationships, and work opportunities over their digital counterparts. It will become increasingly important that we continue to build local community by patronizing independent local businesses and supporting community organizations in whatever way we can. If there's one thing that's become apparent to me during this period of imposed isolation, it's the impact of interpersonal communication and interaction on well-being. In terms of finances, and in spite of the banks suggesting otherwise, keeping tangible assets like cash and precious metals will be the best way to ensure your security. If it's not something you can hold in your hand, it's not something that should be viewed as in your possession. When there is the potential for an item to vanish into thin air in the blink of an eye, you should not view that item as something you own. Some examples of assets that you own that can be taken from you at any time are shares of companies that are held in brokerage accounts that don't offer you a stock certificate, like Robinhood, for example, and cryptocurrency because it's all digital and you can be locked out of your account at any time. I know this for a fact because it happened to me on Coinbase. I also want to caution against keeping too much money in your bank account. While it's only practical to keep some of your wealth in a checking account so that you can use your debit card or credit card, the same principle applies here as it does to cryptocurrencies. It's all digital ones and zeros, and there's no guarantee that that money will be available to you in the future. Investing in real estate is also advisable because in addition to being a tangible asset, it offers utility in the sense that it can provide shelter in the face of economic uncertainty and can even potentially be a source of income if you're able to rent to tenants. Finally, be careful how much faith you put in the cloud. Physically possessing important documents and opting to own media files, including music, movies, and TV shows, or even their physical equivalents like DVDs or vinyl records, rather than streaming, is the best hedge against an internet blackout or potential power grid failure. Reducing the amount of radiation you are exposing yourself to can be seen as an added bonus of decreasing your reliance on IT infrastructure. This portrait I've painted for the future may seem bleak to many, but the circumstances don't have to be dire. Those who have prepared and taken the measures that I've outlined here will be able to not just survive, but ultimately thrive in the face of adversity, and may find peace and contentment in getting back to a more natural, analog way of life.